just so I do not forget. Yeah, the prompts are very simply, how would Leah's family tell her story? So, we get Anne Fadiman's telling of the story in this very nice award-winning book, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award. This is Anne Fadiman here, in case you're wondering what she looks like. But how would the Lee family tell her story? It's actually not so simple. So I asked you to, pick a specific character. You could even write from the first person perspective. You could also write from the third person perspective. You guys know the difference between those, don't you? What pronouns do you use in first person perspective? I. Yeah, exactly. So you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but I think it's kind of a nice way to do that assignment is you can really kind of put yourself into the Lee family and think about, what did they go through? So that's that one. The second one is cast. So if you enjoyed discussions of cast or you have things to say about cast, then here's your chance to say them. You can look for cast and the spirit catches you and you fall down. Not really discussed, honestly. And that's okay, but you can find them and you can use Wilkerson to kind of sort that out. And then the other one, if this is the Lee family perspective, this is the cast perspective, this is sort of the doctor perspective, right? And so were the doctors justified in having Leah sent to Child Protective Services, sent to a foster family is maybe a better way to put it. And in this one, I'm very explicit. Like I want you to use sort of the full story to make this assessment. We have hindsight, the benefit of hindsight, and we can try to kind of make a final judgment on that. Finally, also course evaluations are now open. Maybe you've seen that. You probably get emails from the registrar with instructions on how to do it. So I won't send you to it now, but please do this. The window closes in less than a week on the 9th, which I guess is a Sunday, a week from yesterday. And these things matter, right? It obviously lets me know what you think of the class, but also it goes to my department chair and the dean and everybody. So, it's an important part of the semester. And I just ask that you take it seriously, right? That you answer truthfully and honestly and all that sort of stuff. Let me know how the semester went. Let me know what worked, what didn't work. So please do complete those and do take them seriously. So this is basically it. This is the final paper. Hopefully these prompts are clear. They should be pretty straightforward. And yeah, they don't even connect to too much else that we've done in the semester. We got a little Wilkerson here. You can pull in some Wendy Doniger double vision if you wanted to do in the other ones, but I don't force you to do it. So it's really just, let's think about this book that we've been reading and write a little paper about it. So if there are no questions, which I don't think there were, let's keep going. So there's this nice video. I guess first of all, last time we did the podcast and you guys all wrote about it. So I think we don't need to spend too much time revisiting those themes. I actually have a slide a little further down that we can revisit. So I want to redirect to a new thing today. There's this nice video of an interview with Anne Fadiman. I thought about assigning it to you, but I think it's too long and it's a little rambling. Like there are a lot of different questions and stuff. But a few things I want to highlight for you. I guess we can just record. I think this one doesn't have copyright flags. So one, I was watching this before class, but one thing I wanted to show you starts at the 39-minute mark around here. So here's advice about how to write a paper, right? So if you're thinking, what will I say in my paper? right? And if you're thinking there's so many details and there's so much to say, I don't know if you guys have ever had this problem when you try to write a paper. You can imagine in a book like this, and Fadiman had to think about a question like that. There's so many details. How do I know what to include? How do I know what order to include it in? It gets a little overwhelming, doesn't it? So here's her advice about how to write under these circumstances. She's actually an excellent writer, and I think we can all gain from her response. I thought it was very illuminating, so I want to share it with you. Here we go.
Couple of things like that. But when you're deciding what to put in, you have to be really selective, because if you put in everything that's good, everything individually is good, but the pacing is wrong and the book is too long and you can't see the forest for the trees. So you have to force yourself. And so I'm going to bore my two former students here for a moment, but I would like to share with you a concept that has been very important in my classes. I think that this was after your time, Nadja, but not after your time, Zara. So I have a friend, had a friend, a late friend, named Mark O'Donnell, who was a marvelous humor writer, and he won a Tony for writing the book of Hairspray. And he grew up in Cleveland, and when he was growing up, he used to read every week My Weekly Reader, which was a children's magazine, sort of like highlights for children. Bruce is smiling, showing your age, Bruce, that you remember My Weekly Reader. And he told me once that he had read a riddle in My Weekly Reader, and the riddle was, Q, how do you sculpt a statue of David? A.
Maybe I'll pause it. What do you guys think? How do you sculpt a statue of David? Has anybody heard this before? Q. How do you sculpt a statue of David? What does that mean? Okay, that's a good question. Michelangelo David. So this is one of the most famous statues in the world. No, I don't know. One of the most famous statues in, let's say, European history is Michelangelo's David. So Davy and Goliath, David. So the question is, how do you make this statue, right? That's a very sophisticated, beautiful statue. And so the question is, how do you make a statue as beautiful and as amazing as this, right? And of course, this is going to apply to the writing process. All right, so I'm glad we went over that, actually. It makes that more clear. All right, let's listen to the answer.
It's easy. You take a block of marble and you remove everything that doesn't look like David.
Is that funny? All right, here, I'll make sure that you guys are all in on the joke. A, you take a block of marble and you remove everything that doesn't look like David. All right, so I'll let you think about this joke as Fadiman explains. Right, easier said than that. Well, that's why it's a joke. But let's see how Fadiman connects this to the writing process.
Well, as soon as he told me this, I thought, oh my God, this is just going to change everything. And if any of you ever use this, you cannot use this without properly ascribing it to Mark O'Donnell. He is not the ultimate source. Weekly Reader is the ultimate source, but I wouldn't know this without Mark.
Again, citing your sources, right? So she's into it too. All of us professors, we love this kind of stuff. I guess she's not a professor, but she does. Actually, yeah, I think she is. She does teach at various journals.
And I realized this is going to help me with my writing, and it's also going to help my students with their writing. So I think you need to ask yourself, what am I trying to say? And there might be a lot of really interesting material, but if it doesn't fall under the category of what I am trying to say, it doesn't look like David, and you have to remove the marble.
Okay, so hopefully with that explanation, that's kind of clear. Maybe I'll ask you guys to reiterate for us. So what does this joke have to do with the writing process? How do we apply this to our final paper? Because we have this big old block of marble right here, right? This is a huge block of marble. So what is she saying? How do we use this joke to help us in our writing?
That maybe so if we have a lot of ideas, like a block of marble, and we have just this very, very big concept, you start removing piece by piece the things that I guess are not part of your argument.
I like that you use the word argument, because again, if we look at these final paper prompts, yeah, this is kind of what I'm asking you to do too. What is my argument, right? And so this is really where writing, it doesn't have to be where writing begins, right? Because you begin with the big block of marble, you begin with the big mess of ideas, and you don't know where you're going to take it, but it must result in this, right? Because that is your David, right? As Simone was just saying, this is what you want to create, is this argument. So it really needs to always come back to that question. What is my argument? And does this writing reflect what my argument is, right? It's easier said than done, as Harrison said here, but it must be the goal of writing, is to express a clear idea. And I wish somebody had told me this when I was like writing my dissertation, because again, it's so easy to get caught up in the weeds, right? In the massive block of marble and all of these different details that you're sort of swimming in. And there's so many details in this book. It's so dense. There's so much to do. You must focus on your argument, right? So that is my advice to you as you're thinking about which one of these prompts I want to do. This one's a little more descriptive. There's not as much of a narrative here, but you can make a let's say persuasive description, even if it's not totally an explicit argument. But these two are really both quite explicit in their argumentation. So I really want you to focus on that. Yeah, what is my argument and how am I going to prove it? So that is her advice, is to think about it as like a statue, right? And you take away anything that does not add to your argument. So again, I think this is a very helpful piece of advice, and I hope it helps you as you are preparing to write. Questions about that? There's another section of this interview, and again, of course, this is our author, Anne Fadiman, that we're listening to here. There's another question that I thought was really excellent from this interview, and then I will stop the interview. You're welcome to watch the whole thing. As you can see, it's an hour and no, it's 2 hours. It's 2 hours long, so it's a bit of an investment of time, but I think it's worth it. What was I looking for? 53, I think it is. Yeah. So here's one more question as we think about what is this book and how might we analyze it for our papers.
Meg? Hi, Anne. I'm Meg Kissinger, a visiting professor here, and we had a great discussion about your book.
Oh,
and
thank you.
One of my favorite things actually was in the afterword that you wrote, and it's so beautiful. I just wanted to repeat it and ask you to comment on it.
Sure.
And you said, empathy is hard. It's harder than anger. It's harder than pity.
Yeah, boy, pity is really easy. Those poor Hmong. Oh my God, aren't they poor? They lost everything and we really screwed them. That is so easy. Anger is easy. I did spend some time being angry at my characters. I mean, I spent so many years, there would be periods when I'd sort of want to, shake Fu by the shoulders and say, why didn't you realize that the doctors were so well-intentioned? And then I certainly wanted to shake the doctors by the shoulders and say, there were some other things you could have done, and, foster care. But mostly I wasn't angry at the characters. So it would just be little brief storms. My essential extreme affection for both sides would, come out a few days later. But I was really angry at the United States, really, really angry. And in our current refugee crisis, it's almost like having an anniversary reaction to the traumatic death of someone you love. A lot of my feelings of anger at my country for what they did to the Hmong and how they screwed up their resettlement have been just, kind of unbidden, just sort of seeping out and making me feel angry again. So anyway, those feelings are easy. They just come. You don't have to make them happen, and sometimes, in fact, you try to make them not happen. Empathy is hard because it's different from sympathy. I mean, you really have to put yourself into the other person's point of view. And that is not so easy, especially with the Lees, because they're just so different from me. I come from this, super intellectual, rational family where all problems could be solved by being cerebral. And Neil and Peggy were cerebral, and they failed in solving that problem. So, in order to see things from the Lee's point of view, I had to give up a lot of the things that I'd clung to my entire life, that were sort of my bulwark, that made me feel safe and strong. I realized that there are a lot of situations in which they're just completely worthless. And I also, I guess, feel that many of the world's problems couldn't exactly be solved, but would be much improved via empathy. I mean, I don't think it's a panacea, but I do think that it helps, and I think that many people confuse it with pity. And when people pity other people, there's immediately a hierarchy, and the pitier is always higher than the pitiee. And the point about empathy is that by very definition, you have to be exactly on the same level because you're aligned.
Thank you.
Okay, there's more to that conversation, but I think we can pause there. And we haven't talked about the afterword yet, but we'll do that Thursday. So what do you guys think about this empathy thing? So she said pity is easy, anger is easy, empathy is hard. Do you agree with that formulation? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, because pity is just like seeing it from an outside perspective, like, oh, that's terrible, that sucks. I get like I hear about that, and it sucks for them. And then anger's also easier because you can point fingers, which partially, I mean, they have every right to point fingers, but empathy is hard because it's just kind of like settling down to see the perspective of opposite sides. So why did Neil and Peggy think like that? And why were they so like, I wouldn't say close-minded, but then after that they later had to go through their son's leukemia, and then they so that you feel bad for them. And also there's a point where Western medicine does work, but at the same time it's difficult because you can't just enforce that onto someone's head when their ways is different. So it's difficult to settle in and see both and understand both, because you'll disagree with one side and then you'll disagree with the other.
Yeah, and when we have these disagreements, it's easy to kind of fall back into these usual modes of pity and anger and maybe some other things mixed in too. Yeah, it's excellent. And one thing it makes me think about too is we've talked a bit about blame and kind of narratives of blame, and how we can blame the parents or we can blame the doctors. But really, in a funny way, in a difficult way, it's almost like no one's really to blame that this girl got sick, right? It just was her situation. She was just born with this illness. And so regardless of who we want to blame for taking care of her in some sort of way, pity and anger come back to these narratives of blame. But this story really, at its core, resists that, I think.
And the other thing is that they were both right in different moments.
That's right.
So I think that her dad had colon cancer.
I think so. Yeah, she wrote a book about it, in fact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
and she talked about how, because I was really interested in this. I was also very interested in the podcast. I actually was able to contact Calcalia.
You were?
Yeah, and she responded.
Okay.
But
That's
it
amazing.
was yeah, it was really great. But yeah, for me, for example, like I felt very angry when I listened to the podcast,
Mhm.
because the minute she started crying, I was just like, I was fuming, like thinking like, how could they say that? And then how they later said, they said like, well, she's kind of like monopolizing the conversation and it's unfair for us. But they were also not being, they were essentially just not being empathetic, even though they had maybe a right intention, because they were just trying to understand the situation and maybe talk about like, okay, maybe this is not exactly chemical warfare, but for her and for her family, it's like, this is not about what was in the yellow rain. This is not about the what the rain had or whatever it is. This is about like genocide, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
And they were so invalidating towards her, it made me so angry. And I feel like that's also part of what Anna's talking about, because you hear this and it's like, how are people not empathetic at all? And they also make it very logical, like having this Harvard professor talk to her and her family about, oh, or like ex-CIA agent, oh, this is what really happened. When it's like, well, how are you to say what really happened when you weren't there?
Mhm.
And it's a way more personal subject, and sometimes I feel like these people see it in a, like how she said, and like Peggy and Neil, they see it in a very logical way,
Mhm.
which is not beneficial to anyone really.
Well, not all the time, right?
Not,
Like,
not right, not all the time.
yeah,
But like Western medicine is helpful, you know,
Mhm. Yeah.
for sure. So I feel like both of them from each side were a little bit stubborn.
Mhm. Now, can you go back to this, Simone? So just so people understand, this is the person that Simone got in contact with, Calcalia Young. So she was the translator for the podcast episode we're
Yeah.
listening to. So how did you contact her? What did you contact her about?
So when I finished listening to the interview,
Mhm.
I Googled her, and she actually talks about this a lot. I think she's written books.
Mhm.
She's like also like an activist. She also has tried to spread knowledge on everything that's happened among people. And I kind of found her website, and she has a she's everywhere. She's like on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
And I sent her an email um, saying like I had just listened to this interview, and like I also try to be very careful because I know this is very traumatic, and I didn't want to bring up this like this whole trauma to her, which is very heavy emotionally. So, but I told her like I had listened to this interview, and I just want to let you know that it's like a lot of people believe you, and this should not be doubted. Um, and like these basically like these white men don't really know like what they're talking about, and like I said a couple of things like I wrote, but I was very also gentle because I like I said I didn't want to um kind of overstep.
Mhm.
And but basically my argument, I mean what I was just telling her is like what had happened to you and your family as survivors is super valid, and it's real, and it is not a debate topic to talk about like oh, is this actually something that happened? It's like no, this is it's real regardless of what was in the rain, you know.
Mhm.
So she messaged me back. She was so nice to me. And she was like, Simone, your words really got to my heart. And she was really, really nice.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, she's like a celebrity or something. So the fact that she, was so kind and responsive to you, it just goes on to show she's a very graceful person.
She is just very nice, very sweet.
Well, thank you for sharing with us your story. I'm so impressed that you took the initiative to reach out to her.
It just made me so angry to hear the podcast. I felt like it was so unfair. And when I was writing the forum post, I was like angry writing it.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, you can take that energy into the final paper if you want.
yeah.
Yeah. So, so I'm excited to hear that you're able to dig a little bit deeper. And as I'm sure you saw, she's written on the topic. The Radiolab people wrote on the topic. So
yeah,
there are a lot of
no,
resources to pull from there.
at the end of Radiolab, they had apologized too, but to me, it felt a little bit insincere.
Yeah.
So, but that's just me. But
Yeah, well, and the TED Talk that we watched last time too, where Jad Abumrad reflects on his entire career, like this was a real central point for him. They clearly did not sort of figure it out immediately after this interview, right? I think it took him years to sort of digest this and reflect on a different way of telling these kinds of stories. Yeah. It's wonderful, and it does really lead us back to this question of empathy, like you're saying, right? How could the Radiolab hosts have approached this subject more empathetically, and why didn't they, right? It's another kind of interesting question, and I think Fadiman is pretty sensitive to this. Why didn't they? Or if we tie it back to the idea of medicine and health, maybe I'll write this out. Why is empathy difficult for, let's just call them medical professionals? Because it is, I think. What's a problem for people who are professional healthcare workers, work at hospitals, nurses, doctors, or even therapists? Why is empathy, I'm not going to say it's a problem, but why is it difficult to maintain this empathy when you're working in the field of medicine? Have you guys ever thought about this before? It's something, again, that let's call it a subject of conversation right now. They can't take off their bio hat like me in this class. What does your bio hat mean, Mario? Can you tell us what is a bio hat? And as he's typing, I went downtown this weekend. I'm not even gonna say for the first time in a while. I've been down a handful of times since I've been vaccinated. But I was talking with a couple friends, and I saw an ambulance, and it really made me think about this class. We're talking about all these ideas somewhat abstractly, all these concepts like pity and anger and empathy and how to be more empathetic toward people and that sort of thing. But one difference between me and, let's say, Neil and Peggy is they're actually working with the sick people, right? They're actually in the room with the patient, helping them when they need help, right? And I didn't stand there and gawk at the professionals helping whoever needed help with the ambulance, but it did make me think, like, there is a very real world of health and disease out there that I'm often cut off from. Separating the fact that you've learned in school abstract thoughts relating to people who haven't necessarily experienced life the same way as you. Yeah, I think that's true. One thing I was thinking about is burnout. Have you guys thought about burnout before? Is that a concept familiar to you? This idea that medical professionals get burnt out?
Yeah, actually, I'm sorry that what I wanted to ask is, Mario, he's a pre-med student, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I wanted to say is, yeah, actually burnout, one of the things with medical people, a lot of medical students, is that they eventually burnout leads to them being less empathetic because they work in this kind of, like I said, like more logical way.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I'm also a pre-med student, and the thing is, one of the things that is very important, I think, is for medical students to take ethics classes.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of medicine is very humanitarian, because it's all about interacting with people.
Yep.
And the consequences of burnout sometimes are less empathy.
Yeah, and one thing Mario and I have talked about, I think it was probably in a breakout room, is how medical education has changed a bit since the 80s, right? Like this book is a little outdated. I think many of the ideas it presents are still nonetheless true, as for example, the Radiolab episode shows, right? These are still relevant questions. But yeah, this idea of, medical ethics, bioethics, right? That's an entire field. And most medical schools do have ethical courses kind of in line with what Simone was saying, particularly now in the last 20 years, those have developed quite a bit. But really, yeah, what does it mean to be burnt out? One of my friends I was talking with over the weekend is a therapist, and, she has to kind of work with people who are really stressed out all the time. And a doctor has to help sick people, maybe even dying people, right? Injured people. People who have COVID, who can't see their loved ones, people who can't afford the medical care that they need, right? Think about all of these things that a medical professional has to deal with these days. It's really, really heartbreaking, right? And so it's easy for Professor Bill to kind of hang out in his comfortable space in Manhattan College and say, oh, yeah, all those medical professionals need to be more empathetic, when I'm not having to kind of dig into the mud, so to speak, right, and deal with all the suffering that a medical professional really does see. So again, I think this idea, anger is easy, pity is easy. It really comes back to these narratives of blame, where somebody is making a mistake and we get angry at them, and then somebody else is a victim and we pity them. But like Ann Fadiman is saying, we can do better than that, right? We can do better than that and try to sort of see beyond these lines. And one way to do that, right, is not just to say, let's do better and let's be empathetic. One way to do that is to ask these questions. So now we can kind of pivot. I don't want to stop what is a good conversation, but more, maybe we can pivot into this conversation. Let's see, where's a good place to begin? Yeah, maybe I'll show you this Google Doc first and share it with you guys. I want to give you time to do this. There's plenty of time. We've got over a half hour left. But here are these 8 questions from the section we read for today. Again, I highlighted the government property chapter last week as a really important chapter. This week, it's called the 8 questions, chapter 17, is also a very important chapter. And it really highlights with these questions at the end of 260 and 261. These come from, sorry, I'm late. Yeah, you're good. In case you didn't see it, Eric, there it is. And what was I saying? Yeah, so these come from a guy named Arthur Kleinman, and you've got the Google Doc, so you can start looking at him. Here's Arthur Kleinman. He is retired now, but he was a medical anthropologist, right? And so he works in these more, let's say, humanities-focused aspects of medicine, and he has been doing that. He's also a trained physician, right? So he's one of these amazing people who's like an MD, PhD, and he taught at the Harvard Medical School for many years. So he really pioneered these conversations about medical ethics and how we can think about medicine in a more, we could say, empathetic way. And he even gave us tools to do that, right? It's really kind of unbelievable. So maybe I will turn you guys over to this. It's, again, page 260, 261. You can read through these questions. I kind of summarize them here. And so one thing maybe you can think about is, here's Fadiman's reflections on it. She says, the first few times I read these questions, they seemed so obvious, I hardly noticed them. Around the 50th time, I began to think that, like many obvious things, they might actually be a work of genius. So they look very simple and very obvious, right? And so that's Fadiman's initial reflection. But she said after reading them 50 times, and you don't have to read them 50 times, but I want you to read them carefully now. I want you to think, what are these designed to do, right? That's the big question here, is what are these questions? What are they designed to do? And you can think about, how would Neil and Peggy answer them? Howard Forward now, Cal. So that those are sort of the two cultures we've talked about, right? We could say the biomedical side of things that Neil and Peggy represent, and then the more, let's say, Hmong folk tradition side of things that the Lee family represents. What are they designed to do? Why are they a work of genius? And so that's what I want you to figure out now. Any questions before we do a little breakout discussion? And again, you can take this conversation about anger, pity, empathy into the breakout rooms as well. So let's, what do you think? Work of genius or just some questions that a Harvard guy came up with? What do these questions do? Maybe that's an easier way to think about it. What do these questions do? Isa says, not a genius. Why not? What are these questions designed to do? Who can help me with that? What did you guys talk about in your group? Maybe I'll highlight Isa because she's actually talking with me. They seem like regular questions designed to help you find the cause of a problem. Okay. So they look kind of normal to Isa. They seem kind of obvious, right? Scientific method. Okay. Seem like scientific method. Is there a way to answer these that doesn't feel scientific? I mean, if we look at 260, Fadiman does answer the questions, right? On page 260. So maybe if we ask, a regular doctor, we'll get the scientific method. So I agree with Isa in that regard. But what if we ask the Lee family? What do you call the problem? What would the Lee family, how would they answer that? What does the Lee family call Leah's problem? What does the Lee family call Leah's problem? What do they call it? What's the name that they give it? Yes, so Mario's very good at Hmong language now. No, it's Kaldape, right? It's on page 260. It's the spirit catches you and you fall down. It's the name of the dang book that we're reading, right? So clearly, this is an important term for Fadiman. It's an important term for the Lee family. And again, just to speak directly to Isa, not so scientific, right? The spirit catches you and you fall down. So it really depends on how you answer these problems. Okay, let's go to the next one. What do you think has caused the problem? How would the Lee family answer that one? Evil spirits, yeah. In the book it says soul loss, but yeah, same idea. The spirit has taken her soul away. And we could go through each one, but we don't need to do that. And let's see, how severe is it? What kind of treatment do you think the patient should receive? Right, so that's number 6. That's sort of an interesting one. The Lee family, and we could say the scientific community, would answer this very differently, right? And that was something we just discussed all of last week, right? So on the one hand, maybe we can make a statement about this now. What this could do is it could be the scientific method, like Isa said, depending on who we talk to, but it could also give a very different perspective on a disease, right? It opens up. Let's say if I'm sick, right, a doctor could come in and say that I have epilepsy, or a Hmong shaman could come in and go through those same questions and come up with a very different explanation, right? So what makes this a work of genius? Does anyone want to argue that it is a work of genius? What is the genius behind this? Maybe you can tell because I'm sharing it with you. I agree that it's actually pretty important development. But what is the genius behind these questions? What is it? What does it do? I guess we're back at that again. What does it do? Maybe we don't see the genius in the questions. All right, well, let's turn to, where is it? This idea of compliance and compromise. I thought maybe that can help open some stuff up for us. So let's continue reading together 261. I figured you guys might do this in your groups, but apparently you weren't able to do it. So Fadiman calls Kleinman, right? This guy, Arthur Kleinman. She calls him and she asks for any advice. And this last paragraph, again, I think it's a very important paragraph. He says, I have 3 suggestions. I have 3. First, get rid of the term compliance. So his first suggestion is about compliance. Get rid of the term compliance. It implies moral hegemony. Maybe you guys don't know this word. You know the word hegemony? Probably don't. It's talking about power, right? So dominance, leadership or dominance, especially by one country or social group over the other. So moral hegemony means one group is dominant over the other. If you talk about compliance, one group is dominating the other, right? It implies moral hegemony. You don't want a command from a general, you want a colloquy. Colloquy is probably how you pronounce that. So a conversation, right? Second, instead of looking at a model of coercion, look at a model of mediation. Okay, so he doesn't like compliance. He does like mediation. Okay, so that's the next point. So what does he mean by that? He says, go find a member of the Hmong community or go find a medical anthropologist who can help you negotiate. Remember that a stance of mediation, like a divorce proceeding, requires compromise on both sides. Decide what's critical and be willing to compromise on everything else. Third, you need to understand that as powerful an influence as the culture of the Hmong patient and her family is on this case, the culture of biomedicine, the culture of biomedicine. The culture of biomedicine is equally powerful. If you can't see that your own culture has its own set of interests, emotions, and biases, how can you expect to deal successfully with someone else's culture? And that's the end of the chapter. And so the next chapter is going to begin to answer those questions, which I think is assigned for next time. So we won't fully explore these suggestions today. We'll continue with them next time. Okay, so what is he saying? Let's summarize now. So he's saying compliance, this language of compliance is a problem. Have we seen the language of compliance in this book? Ooh, I just changed it to a different language. In this book. Where does compliance come in? The answer is yes, we have seen it. Where does compliance come in the story of Leah Lee? So compliance, of course, comes from the word comply, the action of complying, which means to follow a command, act in accordance with a wish or command, right? So where have we seen compliance show up? Issues of compliance. Are the Lee family, are they good at complying with orders? I would not say that, actually. The Lee family is terrible at compliance. They refuse to comply. When did they refuse to comply? For example, they refused to give their daughter medicine, right? Initially, at least. Yeah, you can say the opposite. Okay, okay, okay. What were the consequences of their lack of compliance? Remember, Neil and Peggy gave them rules to follow, instructions to follow. They were unwilling or unable to follow those instructions, and therefore something happened to them. Didn't something happen to them? Happened to their family last time, last class? We spent the entire class talking about this.
Okay, so basically the whole question is the whole thing about is it really like an order though? That's the whole question.
Mhm.
Like, are they, when I said what I meant to say was like, I guess they weren't being compliant, but like, it's like medicine. It's, it's not like it's not like you're in a position of power. You're telling them what they should do in the best terms of their health.
Mhm.
So, to say that they're non-compliant is certainly the wrong vocabulary.
Mhm.
You know what I'm trying to say? Like, um, yeah, they suffered the consequence of like basically losing their daughter right away,
Mhm.
and eventually losing their daughter, but um, they lost a family member, which is the worst consequence, one of the worst consequences. Um, however, um, the problem is it's not like it was a law and they disobeyed the law
Mhm.
and they suffered for it, and you can throw them in prison, say you didn't follow the orders. But at the same time, um, the problem is the communication, and if that would have been remedied, then you can look at it less of giving an order, but more as just showing just showing how they can help,
Mhm.
and it just never was brought about. So instead of enforcing, maybe the word should be showing the way. I don't
Good.
know.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mario. So that was a nice kind of reflection on everything, right? And it is time, right? It's the
I
final.
felt that no one was talking, so like I wanted to say something.
I appreciate it. Yeah, yeah. It's a consequence of our current formatting, right? I anyways, yeah, across all of my classes, the silence is real. And so, yeah, I appreciate you participating. And just maybe this will assist you as you write your papers. But on page 81, there is this language of compliance. I just found it in the official thing. It says, as a result of the parent's failure to comply with medication instructions, and then you know the rest. The daughter gets taken away by the court. So it really is this language of compliance. And so I think Kleinman is honing in on it. Mario is honing in on it. And if we come back to these 8 questions, it is pushing against this concept of compliance, right? It's opening it up for conversation. So usually you go to the doctor, you say, hey, doctor, I'm sick. They look at you, they tell you what the problem is called, they tell you what caused it, they tell you how it works and how severe it is, right? That's what their job is. It's usually kind of, there is this hierarchical relationship where the doctor is above and we are below because they went to medical school and they know more than we do. And again, a lot of the time that's good, right? Because we're confused and we need help. But some of the time, in this particular case, this language of compliance, this idea of the doctor knows everything and we know nothing, causes problems, right? And this book is special because it's really exploring those problems that they tend to cause. So what is his suggestion, sort of like what Mario was saying a moment ago, is mediation, right? He talked about, oh, the lights are out because I'm not moving around enough. is mediation instead of compliance, right? Is compromise is another word we can use. So how can the doctors kind of isolate what is the most important thing, like Mario was saying, if it's caring for this young girl, which I think we could all agree is probably the most important thing, how can we effectively communicate, mediate, and compromise on determining the best method to care for this little girl, right? So there's a shift from compliance to mediation. Those are kind of the first two. This idea of recognizing the culture of biomedicine, maybe we can save that for next time, because I think there are other things we can cover today. Yeah, so let's save this slide for next time, but it is kind of an interesting slide. And this is my suggestion for you guys as we move forward. Obviously, you know, we won't be able to remember everything we learn in this class, but if pity is easy and anger is easy, and we live in a time that is filled with anger and also pity, but I think anger is the more dominant one, and empathy is hard, I encourage you to remember this as a way to open up, right? If we ask these sorts of questions, these questions that are really trying to see from the other person's perspective, it could have happened in the Radiolab episode. It could have happened in the case of Leah Lee. We really do open up reality to see beyond our biology hat, like Mario was talking about, and to see more empathetically, like Simone was talking about earlier today. Something that you did not read in the book is what happened to Leah Lee. So the section we read for today started on 250, and the very first sentence is Leah did not die, nor did she recover, which is a little bit confusing, right? Because we didn't talk about the big one yet, and I hope we do get to it in the next 8 minutes. I'll go through this quickly, and what we'll probably do is we'll start with the big one, but I'll just kind of get you guys up to speed. We talked about how Leah had this, I believe it's pronounced grand mal seizure, right? And so she went into this major seizure. She was severely brain damaged. She was not able to normally function. As you can see, here's a picture of her lying in bed on her 30th birthday in 2012. And she went on to pass away later that year. So she spent, I think the number is 26 years of her life in this brain damaged state. But she did not die. And when this book was published, she had many more years to live, right? I guess 15 more years to live when this book was first published. And so she did not die, nor did she recover. Some people at the hospital, I don't think they are named because, again, it's very easy to fall into these patterns of anger if they do get named. No, are they named? Oh, no, actually they did name her. Sharon Yates, a nurse's aide. So we'll just call them a nurse's aide. Blames it on the parents. If only the parents had given Leah the medicine, she wouldn't be like this. I bet when she came back from the foster home, they just didn't give her any medicine. And of course, this is a gross misrepresentation of reality. They did comply, again, to use that language of compliance. But I think the more interesting thing here is to see, along with this language of compliance, if somebody does not comply, we are prone to blame them, right? It's all their fault. And that's why the girl got sick, is because the parents didn't comply. Is this relevant for our own day and age? What sort of compliance during COVID-19? Are there compliance things that we have to think about? You guys ever get angry at people who don't comply? The masks, everybody. We must comply with the masks. And then some people get angry with those who do comply with the masks because they feel like nobody should comply with the masks, right? And so there's all kinds of anger about compliance these days with COVID-19. And we see some anger about non-compliance happening here. The Depakine seems to have compromised her immune system. And so this little line that Leah's father had said about too much medicine Yeah, Fadiman writes this in italics. She writes, "The Lees were right after all. Leah's medicine did make her sick." So, again, it's not to say that she would have been fine if she had not taken the Depakine. Obviously, the Depakine kept her alive and suppressed her seizures, but at the same time, it may have suppressed her immune system, and she ended up getting a major infection, which caused her to enter into this grand mal seizure. So again, we'll return to the details of the big one next time, but it's something to keep in mind is that there were all kinds of side effects coming with these medicines that she was taking to prevent her seizures, that when she finally did have a major seizure, people didn't even notice that she had entered into sepsis, which it was a general infection throughout her body. And then when she entered into this brain damaged state, everybody started to talk about her as if she were dead. It was sort of an interesting thing where she was not dead, right? Just like Fadiman wrote very eloquently, she did not die, nor did she recover. But from a certain perspective, she was no longer able to function. She was no longer able to work in our usual mode of society. And so people just treated her as if she were dead, right? They talked about what may have killed Leah, the reason Leah died. There was this admission of defeat, a loss of control. And so we have sort of again, a blending of symbols that get layered on to death. But let's be clear, she did not die until much, much later. So we've talked about the blame enough. Yeah, here are some numbers here. She died at the age of 30 in 2012. And maybe in our final few minutes, we can start to talk about this a little bit. What really did happen to her? Fadiman again has a really nice line. Where was it? Is that the very end? Yeah, I think it was this one. On page 147, she has this line about how here was American medicine at its worst and at its best. The patient was reduced from a girl to an analyzable collection of symptoms, thereby able to husband his energies, succeed in keeping her alive. Actually, that's not the one I was looking for. I was looking for, where was it? Maybe I didn't actually put this, I just read it. But this line about how biomedicine is what, yeah, this is what I was looking for. I'll just read it to you on 258. American medicine had both preserved her life and compromised it. I was unsure which had hurt her family more, right? And so we enter into, just like we were talking about, these questions that the medical field is riddled with now, with these different technologies of keeping people alive, things like dialysis and breathing machines and so forth. To what degree should we use them? How should we use them? And to whom should we provide them, right? Like, for example, what's happening in India right now, there's a total lack of respirators, right? People are just dying. There aren't enough hospital beds. And so it's not even a lack of technology, but it's just how this technology is disseminated, right? To what degree people can access it is really the ethical issue here. So again, this line that American medicine had both preserved her life and compromised it. I was unsure which had hurt her family more. If she had been born in Laos, she would have died very young, right? She would have died at the age of like probably 3 or 4 when she started to have these seizures. And because she was able to take the Depakine, because she was able to go to the hospital, she was actually able to live quite a bit longer. And ultimately, because of the love, and I hate to break your heart by showing you this picture, but because of the love of this woman, of her family, she was able to live a much longer, if somewhat compromised life. So that really is the story of Leah Lee, and hopefully that answers the question of what happened to her. Again, when this book was initially published, she was still alive, right? Anne Fadiman could go visit her, go see her, go talk to her. She was not able to talk back, but she was very much alive. So, okay, why don't we cut it off there? Any questions about the 8 questions or anything we discussed today? Empathy, ways to develop empathy, the brilliance of the 8 questions. Again, hopefully these are tools you can use